This week, students at LSE faced a firestorm of condemnation after they staged a peaceful protest against Israel's ambassador to the UK, Tzipi Hotovely. But what is the truth? Now, firstly, who is Tzipi? She was described in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz as the ugly extremist face of Israel, the article adding that she was the prototype of the new far-right Likud party. Now, she not only opposes a two-state solution, she calls for the annexation of all Palestinian land. She says, the land is ours, all of it is ours, we did not come here to apologise for that. She demands the expansion of illegal settlements in the West Bank, rejects Palestinian claims to any of the West Bank, Gaza or East Jerusalem, and calls the occupation a myth. Now, she told Arab members of the Israeli parliament, you are thieves of history. Your history books are empty and you're trying to co-opt Jewish history and Islamicize it. She declared the Nakba of 1948, in which hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were driven from their homes, in which hundreds of villages were destroyed, thousands of Palestinians killed. She calls that an Arab lie. She is a fervent opponent of relationships between Jews and Arabs. She's denounced Diaspora Jews, claiming American Jewish opponents of Netanyahu's policy can't understand what Israelis were experiencing because they live convenient lives and never send their children to fight for their country, and declared in New York that non-Orthodox streams of Judaism chose to take the outside skin of Judaism, the customs and tradition, and to empty it of content from within, instilling liberal values that have no connection to Judaism. As ambassador, she represents a state which was described by Human Rights Watch as practising apartheid, a state which illegally occupies Palestinian lands, which has killed 5,600 Palestinians between 2008 and 2020, compared to 250 Israelis killed by the conflict in the same period. If she is not worthy of protest, then the question really is, who the hell is? Now, reporting of the protest this week was surrounded by abject lies. So the Jerusalem Post reported the ambassador was unable to attend a debate at the London School of Economics. False, entirely false. As the LSE reported, the event was orderly. There's video footage of her freely speaking and taking questions, and the ambassador left as scheduled. Now, when she left, clutching the bouquets which she was given, she was subjected to boos and heckles. For example, aren't you ashamed? As she was safely dispatched to her waiting car by her security detail and then whisked away. Now, there was no violence. As one protester tells me, it was a peaceful protest on our own campus, and the ambassador was safe the entire time and left on time after the event finished. She was not rushed or forced to flee. She was simply going home, and the videos show that students were well away from her. Yet these peaceful, overwhelmingly young protesters, Jewish protesters amongst them, have been subjected to a firestorm. So the heckling and booing, which is what happened, was condemned to Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht was the opening moment of the Holocaust, in which Jews were killed across Nazi Germany, synagogues and businesses destroyed, and Jews suffered mass incarceration in concentration camps. Now, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, declared she was disgusted by the treatment of the Israeli ambassador and declared anti-Semitism has no place in our universities or our country. Now, that is absolutely true. But what on earth does it have to do with this protest? What she has done is directly conflate anti-Semitism with critiques of Israel and protests against an Israeli government figure. Now, there is no evidence of any anti-Semitism. None has been produced at that protest. You might expect this from the ruling Conservatives, but Labour Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds declared anti-Semitism has no place in our society in response to those protests, and that he'd support the police in any investigation. Into what exactly? While Shadow Foreign Secretary Lisa Nandy denounced the ambassador's appalling treatment and declared any attempt to silence or intimidate those we disagree with should never be tolerated. Again, what evidence is she providing? While Keir Starmer declared, this is totally unacceptable, intimidation and threats of violence will not be tolerated. What is Keir Starmer proposing? That students should be banned from booing and heckling racists and those who represent human rights abusing regimes abroad? All of these figures have vilified and demonized overwhelmingly young protesters, Jews amongst them, for speaking out against racism and apartheid, just as previous students protested against apartheid South Africa, including far more aggressively, it should be said, outside apartheid South Africa's embassy in London. Now, I've interviewed many of the students who fear speaking on the record because of retribution, because of the firestorm whipped up against them, some of whom have been subjected to online abuse from extremist accounts because of the firestorm whipped up against them by Tory ministers, by the media, and by Labour politicians. Now, for those who say, why aren't they protesting against China? Well, firstly, I don't think people have gone through the protesting backgrounds of what was, by the way, a small protest. We haven't gone through the protesting backgrounds of many of those protesters. Having spoke to them, I know they are involved, many of them, with a whole range of different forms of activism and protest. But please do protest the Chinese ambassador if he turns up to your university in order to justify the horrific treatment of Uyghur Muslims by the Chinese regime. There is a key difference, though. China is not armed and backed and supported by the British government and by the West. It's not a key Western ally. Israel, of course, is. And the British government played a pivotal role in creating the entire mess in the Middle East in the first place. Now, the demonization of anti-racist and anti-apartheid protesters is very dangerous, extremely dangerous. Not least because the far right have jumped on this bandwagon. I know this from personal experience, having been mobbed by Tommy Robinson supporters who justified the harassment on the grounds that I was a supporter of Hamas and Hezbollah. Obviously, defamatory nonsense. Including, of course, Tommy Robinson himself, who has directly attended a pro-Israeli protest addressed by the Israeli ambassador during the Gaza offensive. This is a cause they have embraced. Now, finally, this whole discussion, let's be clear, is defined by anti-Palestinian racism. It is based on the entire notion that Palestinian life is simply not important. And therefore, when students protest against a key symbol of that racist and apartheid regime in Israel and the illegal occupation by an extremist politician who has said disgusting things over and over again, the establishment rally round not the anti-racist young students, but around that symbol of racism and oppression. And that is a disgrace.